Sweet mother, send your child unto me, for the sins of the unworthy must be baptized in blood and fear.
So, summoned by the cemetery man himself, was wondering when you'd be calling for our services. I see. You do not want us to take a life. You want to join our brotherhood. I see it in you. You are a killer, a taker of life. Your work, your deathcraft, will please the Night Mother. First, recite the 5 tenets of our order, and I will consider yourself a full brother.
Tenet 1. Never dishonor the Night Mother. To do so is to invoke the wrath of Sithis. Tenet 2. Never betray the Dark Brotherhood or its secrets. To do so is to invoke the wrath of Sithis. Tenet 3. Never disobey or refuse to carry out an order from a Dark Brotherhood superior. To do so is to invoke the wrath of Sithis. Tenet 4. Never steal the possessions of a dark brother or sister. To do so is to invoke the wrath of Sithis. Tenet 5. Never kill a dark brother or dark sister. To do so is to invoke the wrath of Sithis.
Very good, very good. What's that? You wish to know more about our leader, our mother? Most lore about our mother can only be considered rumors, and dear brother, I do not spread rumors. I create them. What I can tell you is that she is the bride to our dread father Sithis, the Void. At some point, she had 5 children, 5 fingers of a black hand. Those desperate like yourself will pray to the Void for another's death. The Night Mother's spirit will pass this knowledge on to a listener. The listener tells the speaker, like myself, and a contract with death is made. We will kill anyone from the local schizophrenic skooma addict to the Emperor of Cyrodiil, and their souls will be sent to the Void for all eternity. Many writers and scholars from across the Empire have their own theories as to who or what the Night Mother really was. Here are some. I'll let you come to your own conclusions as to who is right and who is not. The first, Brothers of Darkness, by Palarne Assi, a brief history of the Dark Brotherhood, found in a strange wood elf's house in Skingrad. As their name suggests, the Dark Brotherhood has a history shrouded in obfuscation. Their ways are secret to those who are not themselves brothers of the Order. Brother is a generic term. Some of their deadliest assassins are female, but they are often called brothers as well. How they continue to exist in shadow, but be easily found by those desperate enough to pay for their services, is not the least of the mysteries surrounding them. The Dark Brotherhood sprang from a religious order, the Morag Tong, during the Second Era. The Morag Tong were worshippers of the Daedric spirit Mephala, who encouraged them to commit ritual murders. In the early years, they were as disorganized as only obscure cultists could be. There was no one to lead the band, and as a group, they dared not murder anybody of any importance. This changed with the rise of the Night Mother. All leaders of the Morag Tong, and then afterward the Dark Brotherhood, have been called the Night Mother. Whether the same woman, if it is even a woman, has commanded the Dark Brotherhood since the Second Era is unknown. What is believed is that the original Night Mother developed an important doctrine of the Morag Tong. The belief that, while Mephala does grow stronger with every murder committed in her name, certain murders were better than others. Murders that came from hate pleased Mephala more than murders committed because of greed. Murders of great men and women pleased Mephala more than the murders of relatively unknowns. We can approximate the time this belief was adopted, with the first known murder committed by the Morag Tong in the year 324 of the Second Era. The potentate Versidue-Shaie was murdered in his palace, in what is today the elsewhere kingdom of Senchal. In a brash move, the Night Mother announced the identity of the murders by painting Morag Tong on the walls in the potentate's own blood. Previous to that, the Morag Tong existed in relative peace, more or less like a witch's coven, occasionally persecuted but usually ignored. In remarkable synchronicity, at a time when Tamriel the Arena was a fractured land, the Morag Tong was outlawed throughout the continent. Every sovereign gave the cult's elimination his highest priority. Nothing more was officially heard from them for 100 years. It is more difficult to date the era when the Morag Tong re-emerged as the Dark Brotherhood, especially as other guilds of assassins have sporadically appeared throughout the history of Tamriel. The first mention of the Dark Brotherhood that I have found is from the journals of Blood Queen Arla Mahira of Hagath. She spoke of slaying her enemies by her own hand, or if necessary, with the help of the Night Mother and her Dark Brotherhood, the secret arsenal my family has employed since my grandfather's time. Arla Mahira wrote this in Second Era 412, so one can surmise that the Dark Brotherhood has been in existence since at least 360, if her grandfather had truly made use of them. The important distinction between the Dark Brotherhood and the Morag Tong was that the Brotherhood was a business as much as it was a cult. Rulers and wealthy merchants used the order as an assassin's guild. The Brotherhood gained the obvious rewards of a profiting enterprise, as well as the secondary benefits that rulers could no longer actively persecute them. They were needed. They were purveyors of an essential commodity. Even an extremely virtuous leader would be unwise to mistreat the Brotherhood. Not long after Alamahera's journal entry came perhaps the most famous series of executions in the history of the Dark Brotherhood. The Akaviri Emperor Potentate, Savirien-Chorak, and every one of his heirs were murdered in one bloody night in Sun's Dawn in 430. Within a fortnight, the Akaviri Potentate crumbled to the delight of its enemies. For over 400 years, until the advent of the warrior Emperor Tiber Septim, chaos reigned over Tamriel. Though no comparatively impressive executions have been recorded, the Brotherhood must have grown fat with gold during that interregnum. The Dark Brotherhood has no shortages of business opportunities, and accounting, I have been informed, is the Brotherhood's favored euphemism for an execution. While they are officially considered an unlawful organization in every corner of the Empire, like the Thieves' Guild, they are almost universally tolerated. Next, Fire and Darkness by Ynir Gorming. The history of the Morag Tong Assassin Guild. A little bit out of the way, it is found in the Hall of Epochs in the Old Way. Brother, I still call you brother, for we share our bonds of blood, tested by unbroken hatred. Even if I am murdered, which seems inevitable now, know that, brother, you and I are not innocents. So our benedictions of mutual enmity is not tragedy, but horror. This state of silent, shadowed war, of secret poisons and sleeping men strangled in their beds, of the sudden arrow and the artful dagger, has no end that I can see. No possibility for peace. I see the shadows in the room move, though the flame of my candle is steady. I know the signs that This note was found where it had fallen, beneath the floorboards of an abandoned house in the Nordic village of Valenheim, in the 358th year of the Second Era. It was said that a quiet cobbler lived in the house, whispered by some to be a member of the dread Morag Tong, the Assassin's Guild outlawed throughout Tamriel 34 years previously. The house itself was perfectly in order, as the cobbler had simply vanished. There was a single drop of blood on the note. The Dark Brotherhood had paid a call. This note and others like it are rare. Both the Morag Tong and its hated child, the Dark Brotherhood, are scrupulous about leaving no evidence behind. Their members know that to divulge secrets of their orders is a lethal infraction. This, obviously, makes the job of a historian seeking to trace their histories very difficult. The Morag Tong, according to most scholars, had been a facet of the culture of Morrowind almost since its beginning. After all, The history of Resdayn, the ancient name of Morrowind, is rife with assassination, blood sacrifice, and religious zealotry, hallmarks of the Order. It is commonly said that the Morag Tong then, as now, murdered for the glory of the Daedra prince Mephala, but common assumptions are rarely completely accurate. It is my contention that the earliest form of the Tong additionally worshipped an even older, more malevolent deity than Mephala. As terrifying as that Prince of Oblivion is, they had and have reverence for a far greater evil. Writs of Assassin from the First Era offer rare glimpses into the Morag Tong's earliest philosophy. They are, as a matter of fact, as current-day writs, but many contain snatches of poetry which have perplexed our scholars for hundreds of years. Lisping sibilant hisses, ether's sweet sway, rancid kiss of passing sin, and other strange, almost insane insertions into the writs were coded for the names of the person to be assassinated, his or her location, and the time at which the death was to come. Evidence of the Morag Tong's expertise in assassination seems scarcely necessary. The few instances of someone escaping a murder attempt by them are always remarkable and rare, proving that they were and are patient, capable murderers who use their tools well. A fragment of a letter found among the effects of a well-known armorer has been sealed in our vault for some time. It was likely penned by an unknown Tong assassin ordering weapons for his order, and offers some illumination into what they looked for in their blades, as well as the mention of Volnura, the island where the Tong sent its agents in retirement. I congratulate you on your artistry and the balance of heft in your daggers. The knife blade is whisper-thin, elegantly wrought, but impractical. It must have a bolder edge, for arteries when cut have a tendency to self-seal, preventing adequate blood loss. I will be leaving Volnura in 2 weeks' time to inspect your new tools, hoping they will be more satisfactory. The Morag Tong spread quietly throughout Tamriel in the early years of the Second Era, worshipping Mephala and Sithis with blood, as they had always done. When the Morag Tong assassinated the Emperor Riemann in the year 2920 of the First Era, and his successor, Potentate Versidue-Shaie, in the 324th year of the Second Era, the assassins so long in the shadows were suddenly thrust into the light. They had become brazen, drunk with murder, literally painting the words Morag Tong on the wall in the Potentate's blood. The Morag Tong was instantly and unanimously outlawed in all corners of Tamriel, with the exception of its home province of Morrowind. There, they continued to operate with the blessing of the houses, apparently cutting off all contact with their satellite brothers to the west. There, they continued their quasi-legal existence, accepting black writs and murdering with impunity. Most scholars believe that the birth of the Dark Brotherhood, the secular, murder-for-profit order of assassins, was as a result of a religious schism in the Morag Tong. Given the secrecy of both cults, it is difficult to divine the exact nature of it, but certain logical assumptions can be made. In order to exist, the Morag Tong must have appealed to the highest power of Morrowind, which at that time, in the Second Era, could only have been the tribunal of Amalexia, Sothasil, and Vivec. Mephala, whom the Tong worshipped with Sithis, was said to have been the anticipation of Vivec. It is not logical to assume that in exchange for toleration of their continued existence, the Tong would have ceased their worship of Mephala in exchange for the worship of Vivec. The Morag Tong continues, as we know, to worship Sithis. The Dark Brotherhood is not considered a religious order by most, merely a secular organization, offering murder for gold. I have seen, however, proof positive in the form of writs to the Dark Brotherhood that Sithis is still revered above all. So where, the reader asks, is the cause for the schism? How can a silent war have begun when both groups are so close? Both assassin guilds, after all, worship Sithis. And yet, a figure emerges from history who should give those with this assumption pause. The Night Mother. Who the Night Mother is, where she came from, what her functions are, no one knows. Karvalek Tanwe, in his generally well-researched historical fiction 2920, The Last Year of the First Era, tries to make her the leader of the Morag Tong, but she was never historically associated with the Tong, only the Dark Brotherhood. The Night Mother, my dear friend, is Mephala. The Dark Brotherhood of the West, unfettered by the orders of the Tribunal, continued to worship Mephala. They may not call her by her name, but the Daedra of murder, sex, and secrets is their leader still. And they did not, and they still do not, to this day, forgive their brethren for casting her aside. The cobbler who met his end in the Second Era, who saw no end in the war between the Brotherhood and the Tong, was correct. In the shadows of the Empire, the Brothers of Death remain locked in combat, and they will likely remain that way forever. And finally, Sacred Witness by Enric Milrez, an account of Enric's meeting with the Night Mother and her career as an assassin. This can be taken from the Duke's quarters in the House of Mania on the Shivering Isles. I have met countesses, courtesans, empresses and witches, ladies of war, and slatterns of peace. But I have never met a woman like the Night Mother, and I never will again. I am a writer, a poet of small renown. If I told you my name, you might have heard of me, but very likely not. For decades until very recently, I had adopted the city of Sentinel on the coast of Hammerfell as my home. I kept the company of other artists, painters, tapestrists, and writers. No one I knew would know an assassin by sight. Least of all the queen of them, the Bloodflower, the Lady of Death, the Night Mother. Not that I had not heard of her. Some years ago I had the good fortune of meeting Palar-Neassi, a respected scholar who had come to Hammerfell to do research for a book about the Order of Diagna. His essay, The Brothers of Darkness, together with Ynir Gorming's Fire and Darkness, The Brotherhoods of Death, are considered to be canon tomes on the subject of Tamriel's Order of Assassins. By luck, Gorming himself was also in Sentinel, and I was privileged to sit with the two in a dark skooma den in the musty slums of the city, as we smoked and talked about the Dark Brotherhood, the Morak Tong, and the Night Mother. While not disputing the possibility that the Night Mother might be immortal or at the least very long-lived, Assi thought it most likely that several women, and perhaps some men, throughout the ages had assumed the honorary title. It was no more logical to say that there was only one Night Mother, he asserted, than to say that there was only one King of Sentinel. Gorming argued that there was never a Night Mother, or at least no human one. The Night Mother was Mephala herself, whom the Brotherhood referred second only to Sithis. I don't suppose there's any way of knowing for certain, I said with a note of diplomacy. Certainly there is, whispered Gorming with a grin. You can go talk to that cloaked fellow in the corner. I hadn't noticed the man before, who sat by himself, eyes hidden by his cloak, seemingly as part of the dingy place as the rough stone or the unswept floor. Turning back to Ynir, I asked him why that man would know about the Night Mother. He's a dark brother, hissed Palar-Neassi. That's as plain as the moons. Don't even joke about speaking with him. About her. We moved on to other arguments about the Morak Tong and the Brotherhood, but I never forgot the image of the lone man, looking at nothing and everything, in the corner of the dirty room, with fumes of skooma smoke floating around him like ghosts. When I saw him, weeks later, on the streets of Sentinel, I followed him. Yes, I followed him. The reader may reasonably ask why and how. I don't blame you for that. How was simply a question of knowing my city as well as I do. I'm not a thief, not particularly sure-footed and quiet, but I know the alleys and the streets of Sentinel intimately for decades worth of ambling. I know which bridges creak, which buildings cast long, irregular shadows, the intervals at which the native birds begin the ululations of their evening songs. With relative ease, I kept pace with the Dark Brother out of his sight and hearing. The answer to why is even simpler. I have the natural curiosity of a born writer. When I see a strange, new animal, I must observe. It's the writer's curse. I trailed the cloak man deeper into the city, down an alleyway so narrow it was scarcely a crack between two tenements, past a crooked fence, and suddenly, miraculously, I was in a place I'd never seen before. A little courtyard cemetery with a dozen old, half-rotted wooden tombstones. None of the surrounding buildings had windows that faced it, so no one knew this miniature necropolis existed. No one, except the 6 men and 1 woman standing in it, and me. The woman saw me immediately and gestured for me to come closer. I could have run, but no, I couldn't have. I had pierced the mystery right in my adopted sentinel, and I could not leave it. She knew my name. She said it with a sweet smile. The Night Mother was a little old lady with fluffy white hair, cheeks like wrinkled apples that still carried the flush of youth, friendly eyes, blue as the iliac bay. She softly took my arm as we sat down amidst the graves and discussed murder. She was not always in Hammerfell, not always available for direct assignments, but it seemed she enjoyed actually talking to her clientele. I didn't come here to hire the Brotherhood, I said respectfully.
Then why are you here?
The Night Mother asked, her eyes never leaving mine. I told her I wanted to know about her. I didn't expect an answer to that, but she told me.
I do not mind the stories you writers dream up about me.
She chuckled.
Some of them are very amusing, and some of them are good for business.
I like the sexy, dark woman lounging on the divan in Carlock Townway's fiction particularly.
The truth is that my history would not make a very dramatic tale. I was a thief long, long ago, back when the Thieves' Guild was only beginning. It's such a bother to sneak around a house when performing a burglary. Many of us found it most efficacious to strangle the occupant of the house, just for convenience. I suggested to the guild that a segment of our order be dedicated to the arts and sciences of murder. It did not seem like a controversial idea to me.
The Night Mother shrugged.
We had specialists in cat burglary, pickpocketing, lockpicking, fencing, all the other essential parts of the job. But the guild thought that encouraging murder would be bad for business. Too much, they argued. They might have been right, the old woman continued, but I discovered there was a profit to be made, just the same, from sudden death. Not only could you rob the deceased, but if your victim had enemies, which rich people often do, you can be paid for it even more. I began to murder people differently when I discovered that. After I strangled them, I would put 2 stones in their eyes, one black and one white.
Why?
I asked. It was a sort of calling card of mine. You're a writer. Don't you want your name on your books? I couldn't use my name, but I wanted potential clients that know me and my work. I don't do it anymore, no need to. But at the time, it was my signature. Word spread, and I soon had quite a successful business.
And that became the Morag Tong? I said.
Oh, dear me, no.
The Night Mother smiled.
The Morag Tong were around long before my time. I know I'm old, but I'm not that old. I merely hired on some of their assassins when they began to fall apart after the murder of the last potentate. They didn't want to be members of the Tong anymore. And as I was the only other murder syndicate of any note, they just joined on.
I phrased my next question carefully. Will you kill me now that you've told me all this? She nodded sadly, letting out a little grandmotherly sigh.
You're such a nice, polite young man. I hate to end our acquaintanceship. I don't suppose you would agree to a concession or two in exchange for your life, would you?
To my everlasting shame, I did agree. I said nothing about our meeting, which, as the reader can see, was a promise I eventually, years later, chose not to keep. Why have I endangered my life thus? Because of the promises I did keep. I helped the Night Mother and the Dark Brotherhood in acts too despicable, too bloody for me to even set to paper. My hand quivers as I think about the people I betrayed, beginning with that night. I tried to write poetry, but the ink seemed to turn to blood. Finally, I fled, changing my name, going to a land where no one would know me. And I wrote this, the true history of the Night Mother, from the interview she gave me on the night we met. It will be the last thing I ever write. This I know, and every word is true. Pray for me. Editor's note. Though originally published anonymously, the identity of the author has never been in serious doubt. Any layman familiar with the work of the poet Enric Milres will recognize Sacred Witness's familiar cadence and style in such books as his The Alakir. Shortly after publication, Milres was murdered, and his killer was never found. He had been strangled, and 2 stones, a black one and a white one, crushed into his eye sockets very brutally. Hey, thanks for watching that thing that you just watched. Big shout out, of course, to Grande's Graveyard. His channel will be in the description for the parts that he did in the intro. He is a very good friend, and he does very good horror reviews. So if you are a fan of the macabre and the graves, check him out. In terms of like a final analysis of all of the 3 stories of the Night Mother, I personally believe in the Mephala interpretation of that. One kind of makes the most sense to me, and just like it feels like something that Mephala would do. But I cannot stand the interpretation with Enric Milrez. I don't know how else to describe it except just the embodiment of, oh yeah, my girlfriend goes to another country high school. Didn't happen, I don't care. But yeah, you know the rest of the stuff. Like, comment, subscribe if you enjoyed yourself today. I am close, if not by the time this comes out, maybe it'll already happen, to 50 subscribers. And that's pretty cool. Thank you to all of you that have looked at a thing and said, hey, that's pretty cool. I'm gonna see what comes next. I really appreciate it. But above all else, I hope you all have a very happy and very safe Halloween. And remember, we know.